The ancient Victorian mansion loomed before them, its decrepit facade barely visible through the sheets of rain. Lightning illuminated the crumbling turrets and boarded windows, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown lawn. 5 friends huddled beneath a large black umbrella, their excited chatter drowned out by the howling wind. "Are you sure about this, Zach?" Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible above the storm. Zach grinned. His enthusiasm was undampened by the weather. "Come on, guys, this is going to be epic. A night in Ravencrest Manor will be legends." "Or corpses," muttered Emily, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Don't be such a buzzkill, Em," Liam chimed in, nudging her playfully. "Just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" As if in answer, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, sending sparks cascading through the air. Group jumped, huddling closer together. "Maybe we should reconsider," suggested Mike, the usually stoic member of their group. "This storm is getting pretty intense." Zach shook his head vehemently. "No way. We've been planning this for weeks. Besides, it's not like we have anywhere else to go. The road's probably flooded by now." With a collective sigh of resignation, the group trudged towards the dilapidated porch. The wooden steps creaked ominously under their weight, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Zach produced an old iron key from his pocket and inserted it into the rusted lock. With a groan of protest, the door swung open, revealing a cavernous foyer shrouded in darkness. "Home sweet home," Dak declared, stepping inside and flicking on his flashlight. The others followed suit, illuminating the dust-covered interior with their beams of light. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and the musty smell of decay assaulted their nostrils. Ornate furniture, covered in yellowed sheets, created grotesque silhouettes in the gloom. A grand staircase curved upwards, disappearing into the shadows of the second floor. "This place is a dump," Emily grumbled, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "It's got character," Liam countered, running his fingers along an ornate mahogany sideboard. "Can you imagine the parties they must have thrown here back in the day?" Sarah shivered, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. "Let's just find a room to set up camping. I don't want to wander around more than necessary." The group made their way into what appeared to be a spacious living room. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with dusty photographs and tarnished silver frames. Zach immediately set about gathering wood from a nearby pile, determined to bring some warmth and light to their temporary shelter. As the flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow around the room, friends began to relax. They spread out their sleeping bags, opened a few bags of snacks, and settled in for what they hoped would be an exciting night of ghost stories and adventure. "All right, who's got a good scare to share?" Zach asked, rubbing his hands together eagerly. Mike cleared his throat. "I've got one. It's an old story my grandfather used to tell me about this very house." The others leaned in, intrigued. Mike rarely spoke about his family, and the prospect of a personal connection to Ravencrest Manor was too enticing to ignore. Back in the 1920s, this place belonged to a wealthy industrialist named Edward Ravencrest, Mike began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. He was known for throwing lavish parties, but he was also rumored to have a dark side. People whispered about secret rooms, forbidden rituals, and guests who would mysteriously disappear. A gust of wind rattled the windows, making everyone jump. Mike continued, undeterred. One stormy night, much like this one, Ravencrest threw his most extravagant party yet. The house was filled with the elite of society, all dressed in their finest. But as the clock struck midnight, something went terribly wrong. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest, captivated despite her fear. "What happened?" Mike's eyes glinted in the firelight. "No one knows for sure. All that's certain is that when the police arrived the next morning, they found the house empty. Every single guest, including Ravencrest himself, had vanished without a trace. The only clue was a message scrawled in blood on the ballroom wall. The veil has been lifted." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the relentless pounding of rain on the roof. "That's bullshit," Liam declared, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "If that really happened, this place would be famous. It'd be all over those ghost hunting shows." Mike shrugged. "Believe what you want, but my grandfather swore it was true. He said the house has been haunted ever since, that the spirits of those lost souls are still trapped here, waiting for someone to set them free. Emily rolled her eyes. Great. Just what I wanted to hear before trying to sleep in this creepy old dump. Zach clapped his hands together, breaking the tension. Come on, guys. It's just a story. How about we play a game to lighten the mood? I brought cards. As they dealt out hands for poker, using pretzels as chips, the eerie tale began to fade from their minds. Laughter and friendly banter filled the room, almost drowning out the storm that continued to rage outside. It wasn't until several hours later, as the fire began to die down and yawns punctuated their conversation, that Sarah noticed something odd. Hey, does anyone else hear that? She asked, cocking her head to the side. The others fell silent, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the sound of rain and wind. But then, faintly, they heard it too. A soft, melodic humming coming from somewhere deep within the house. It's probably just the wind, Zach said, though he didn't sound convinced. Wind doesn't hum a tune, Emily pointed out, her earlier skepticism giving way to unease. Liam stood up, stretching. I'll go check it out. Probably just a loose shutter or something. I'll come with you, Mike offered, grabbing his flashlight. The two boys headed out into the darkened hallway, their footsteps echoing on the creaking floorboards. Sarah, Emily, and Zach huddled closer to the dying fire, suddenly acutely aware of every shadow and unexplained noise. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The humming had stopped. Liam and Mike had yet to return. They've been gone too long, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We should go look for them. Just as they were about to venture out, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It was Liam's voice, filled with terror and pain. Without hesitation, Zach bolted from the room, Sarah and Emily close on his heels. They raced through the maze-like corridors, calling out for their friends. The house seemed to have come alive around them, shadows dancing at the edge of their vision, unseen fingers brushing against their skin. They found Mike huddled in a corner of the kitchen, his eyes wide with shock. It took him, he whispered. Just pulled him into the wall. Before they could question him further, a low, menacing growl emanated from the darkness behind them. As one, they turned to see a pair of glowing red eyes floating in the shadows. Panic overtook them. They ran blindly, no longer caring about finding Liam, focused solely on escaping the horror that pursued them. But at every turn, the house seemed to thwart their effort. Doors that should have led outside opened into more rooms. Stairs that went up somehow brought them back to the ground floor. It was Sarah who first noticed the whispers, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. The walls themselves seemed to be speaking, a cacophony of voices pleading, threatening, beckoning. Join us, they hissed. Stay with us forever. Emily screamed as an unseen force yanked her backwards. Her friends grabbed her arms, pulling with all their might, but it was no use. With a final terrified shriek, she vanished into the solid wood paneling. The remaining three ran again, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. They found themselves back in the living room, the embers of their fire now cold and lifeless. What's happening? Sarah sobbed, clinging to Zach's arm. Mike's face was ashen. It's all true. Everything my grandfather said. This house, it's alive, and it's hungry. A chilling laugh echoed through the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature plummeted, their breath visible in the frigid air. Welcome, my dear guests, a silky voice purred. A figure began to materialize before them, a tall, elegant man in an old-fashioned tuxedo. His features were handsome, but his eyes burned with an inhuman light. I've been waiting so long for new additions to my collection. Who are you? Zach demanded, trying to sound brave despite his terror. The man's smile was predatory. Edward Ravencrest, at your service, and you, my young friends, are about to become permanent residents of my humble abode. With a gesture, the room transformed. Gone were the dusty sheets and cobwebs. Instead, they found themselves in a glittering ballroom, filled with translucent figures in elegant 1920s attire. Among them, Sarah spotted Liam and Emily, their eyes vacant and glassy. Can't do this, Mike protested. We don't belong here. Ravencrest laughed again, the sound sending chills down their spines. Oh, but you do. You chose to come here to cross the threshold. And now, like all who came before you, you'll dance with us for eternity. The ghostly partygoers converged on them, their cold hands grasping and pulling. Sarah screamed as she felt herself being drawn into their ranks, her very essence seeming to fade. In desperation, Zach lunged for the fireplace poker. With all his strength, he swung it at Ravencrest's head. To his shock, it connected, sending the spectral host reeling. Furious howls shook the house to its foundations. The illusion of the ballroom shattered, plunging them back into the decrepit reality of the abandoned mansion. "Run," Zach yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. Mike was already ahead of them, throwing open the front door. They burst out into the storm, rain lashing their faces as they sprinted down the overgrown driveway. Behind them, an otherworldly wail of rage and frustration split the air. They didn't stop running until they reached Mike's car, parked a half-mile down the road. As they sped away, Sarah looked back to see Ravencrest Manor silhouetted against the stormy sky. For just a moment, she thought she saw faces pressed against the windows. Liam, Emily, and countless others, their eyes filled with a mixture of longing and warning. The 5 friends had entered Ravencrest Manor seeking adventure. Only 3 escaped to tell the tale of the horrors that dwelled within its whispering walls. As dawn broke and the storm finally began to subside, Sarah, Zach, and Mike sat in silence at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Their clothes were still damp, their eyes haunted by the night's event. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from screaming. Zach shook his head, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I don't know. Who would even believe us?" Mike stared into his untouched coffee. "We have to go back," said quietly. The others looked at him in horror. "Are you insane?" Zach hissed. "That place, that thing, it almost killed us." "And it has Liam and Emily," Mike countered. "We can't just leave them there. And what about all the others? How many souls has that house claimed over the years?" Sarah shuddered, remembering the sea of ghostly faces she'd glimpsed in the ballroom. "But how could we possibly fight something like that? We barely escaped with our lives." Mike pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I think I know someone who might be able to help. My aunt, she's into some pretty weird stuff. Occult research, paranormal investigations. I always thought she was a bit crazy, but after what we've seen..." As Mike stepped outside to make the call, Sarah and Zach exchanged worried glances. "We can't go back there," Sarah whispered. "Suicide." Zach nodded, but his expression was conflicted. "I know, but Mike's right. We can't abandon Liam and Emily. They're in that hell because of us, because of my stupid idea for a night of thrills." Or they could discuss it further. Mike returned, his face set with grim determination. "My aunt's on her way. She says she might know a way to free the spirits trapped in Ravencrest Manor. But we'll have to go back, and it'll be dangerous." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted nothing more than to run as far away from this nightmare as possible. But the memory of her friends' terrified faces as they were swallowed by the house steeled her resolve. "When do we leave?" she asked. Mike's aunt, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, arrived later that afternoon. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. The trunk of her car was filled with an assortment of strange equipment and ancient-looking books. "So," she said, after listening to their harrowing tale, "you've encountered the Ravencrest entity. I've been studying that place for years, but I've never had the chance to witness its power firsthand." "Consider yourself lucky," Zach muttered. Dr. Blackwood's expression softened. "I understand you're scared. What you've been through is beyond what most people could comprehend. But you've also been given a unique opportunity. The barrier between our world and the spirit realm is thin at Ravencrest Manor. With your help, we might be able to free those trapped souls and put an end to Edward Ravencrest's reign of terror." "What?" Sarah asked, both curious and apprehensive. The older woman opened one of her books, revealing pages covered in arcane symbols. "There's a ritual that can sever the connection between the house and the spirits it has consumed. But it requires individuals who have experienced its power and survived. You 3 are the key to breaking the curse." As Dr. Blackwood explained the intricacies of the ritual, the gravity of what they were about to attempt settled over the group. They would be risking not just their lives, but potentially their very souls. As night fell, They found themselves once again standing before the ominous silhouette of Ravencrest Manor. The storm had passed, but a heavy mist clung to the ground, swirling around their feet like grasping fingers. "Remember," Dr. Blackwood instructed, handing each of them a small pouch of herbs and a candle. "No matter what you see or hear, stay focused on the ritual. The entity will try to distract you, to prey on your fears. You must resist." With a deep breath, they stepped onto the porch. The door swung open of its own accord, as if inviting them in. The foyer was exactly as they had left it, but now an oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the pounding of their own hearts. They made their way to the ballroom, the site of Ravencrest's fateful party nearly a century ago. Dr. Blackwood began setting up for the ritual, placing candles and drawing intricate symbols on the floor with chalk. As they worked, the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath fogged in the air, and frost began to form on the windows. Well, came the silky voice of Edward Ravencrest. He materialized in the center of the room, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare to return? And you've brought a new friend. How delightful." Dr. Blackwood stood tall, unfazed by the spectral presence. "Your time is over, Ravencrest. We've come to free your prisoners and end this cycle of torment." The ghost's handsome face contorted with rage. "You understand nothing. I am this house. This house is me. We will never be parted." With a wave of his hand, the room transformed. The opulent ballroom of the 1920s materialized around them, filled with the ethereal forms of long-dead partygoers. Among them, Sarah spotted Liam and Emily, their eyes vacant and their movements mechanical as they waltzed to unheard music. "Begin the ritual," Dr. Blackwood shouted, her voice barely audible over the sudden cacophony of spectral laughter and ghostly music. Sarah, Zach, and Mike scrambled to their positions, forming a triangle around Dr. Blackwood. They lit their candles with shaking hands and began to recite the incantation they had memorized. As their voices rose in unison, phantoms around them began to react. Some wailed in anguish, others screamed in rage. The very walls of the house seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. Ravencrest's form flickered and distorted. "Stop this at once," he roared, his voice no longer smooth but guttural and inhuman. Sarah felt an icy hand grasp her ankle. Looking down, she saw a ghostly figure emerging from the floor, face twisted in a silent scream. All around them, more spirits were materializing, reaching out with desperate, grasping fingers. "Don't break the circle," Dr. Blackwood warned. Her own voice strained as she continued the complex ritual. Zach yelped as a chandelier came crashing down mere inches from where he stood. Furniture began to slide across the floor of its own accord, and a fierce wind whipped through the room, threatening to extinguish their candle. Mike's voice faltered as he saw his grandfather's face among the swirling spirits. "Grandpa?" he whispered, concentration wavering. "It's not real," Sarah shouted, her own resolve strengthened by her friend's moment of weakness. "It's trying to distract us." Air grew thick with swirling ectoplasm, making it difficult to breathe. Sarah's lungs burned. She forced herself to continue the chant. Through the chaos, she could see Dr. Blackwood in the center of their triangle, her arms raised as she called upon forces beyond mortal understanding. Ravencrest's form grew larger, looming over them like a colossus. His features melted and reformed, revealing the monstrous entity that lurked beneath the suave exterior. "I have feasted on souls for a century," his voice boomed, shaking dust from the ceiling. "You are nothing to me." A tendril of darkness shot out from his twisted form, wrapping around Dr. Blackwood's throat. The older woman gasped, her incantation interrupted as she fought for air. Without thinking, Sarah broke from her position and rushed to help. As soon as the triangle was broken, a wave of energy pulsed through the room, sending them all sprawling. Ravencrest laughed triumphantly, his form expanding to fill the room. "Foolish mortals, your pathetic attempt to destroy me has only made me stronger." Sarah looked around in despair. Zach was unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Mike was struggling to stand, his eyes unfocused. Dr. Blackwood wheezed on the floor, the dark tendrils still coiled around her neck. This was it, Sarah realized. They had failed. The house had won, and they would join the legions of trapped souls forced to relive this nightmare for eternity. As despair threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah's hand brushed against something in her pocket. It was the small pouch of herbs Dr. Blackwood had given her. A spark of an idea flared in her mind. With the last of her strength, Sarah crawled towards the center of the room. Ravencrest was too busy gloating to notice her movement. She reached the chalked symbols Dr. Blackwood had drawn, now scuffed and broken. "Hey, Ravencrest," she shouted, her voice hoarse but determined. The entity turned its attention to her, its eyes burning with infernal light. "You forgot one thing," Sarah said, mustering every ounce of defiance she had left. "This is your house, and you invited us in." With that, she tore open the pouch and scattered the herbs over the chalk line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the symbols began to glow with an otherworldly light. Ravencrest shrieked, a sound of pure anguish that threatened to shatter Sarah's eardrums. The house itself seemed to groan and shift around them. Dr. Blackwood, free from the tendril's grasp, saw what Sarah had done. With a surge of renewed energy, she rose to her feet and began to chant once more. The glowing symbols pulsed in time with her words, growing brighter with each syllable. The spirits that had been attacking them now turned on Ravencrest, clawing at his massive form. "No," the entity howled. "You are mine. You will always be mine." But his power was fading. The opulent ballroom flickered and faded, revealing the decrepit reality beneath. The ghostly partygoers began to fade, their faces showing relief and gratitude as they were finally released from their century-long imprisonment. Sarah saw Liam and Emily among them, their eyes clear and aware in their final moments. They smiled at her, mouthing silent thanks before they too vanished. Ravencrest's form was collapsing in on itself, drinking and contorting. With a final, earth-shattering scream, he imploded in a burst of blinding light. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden darkness. The house creaked and settled around them, but it felt different now. Empty, in a peaceful way. "You did it," Dr. Blackwood said, her voice filled with awe. "You actually did it." Zach groaned as he regained consciousness, and Mike stumbled over to help him up. They looked around the now ordinary abandoned room, struggling to process what had just occurred. "Is it over?" Mike asked, his voice small and uncertain. Dr. Blackwood nodded, a tired smile on her face. "The connection has been severed, the spirits are free, and the entity is destroyed. Ravencrest Manor is just a house now." As if to punctuate her words, a shaft of early morning sunlight broke through a gap in the boarded-up windows. For the first time in a century, the house welcomed the dawn. The group made their way outside on shaky legs. The mist had lifted, revealing a world washed clean by the previous night's storm. Birds sang in the overgrown garden, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked earth. They stood there for a long moment, basking in the simple joy of being alive and free. The horrors they had faced seemed almost dreamlike in the gentle morning light. "What do we do now?" Zach asked, breaking the silence. Dr. Blackwood placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Now, you rest. You've been through an ordeal few could imagine, let alone survive. Give yourselves time to heal, process." Sarah looked back at the house. It no longer seemed menacing, just old and tired. "What about Liam and Emily? How do we explain?" "Leave that to me," Dr. Blackwood said. "I have contacts who can help handle the official story. As for their families, sometimes not knowing is kinder than the truth." As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt a mix of emotions washing over. Relief, grief, exhaustion, and a profound sense that her world would never be quite the same. "Will we ever be able to forget?" she asked quietly. Mike took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't think we should forget. We've seen things most people never will. We've faced true evil and come out the other side. That changes you, but it doesn't have to break you." Zach nodded in agreement. "We'll carry Liam and Emily with us, and all the others we helped free. That's gotta count for something, right?" As they drove away from Ravencrest Manor for the last time, Sarah allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had survived the unsurvivable, faced down a century-old evil, and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges life threw at them next, she knew they could handle it. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm rays banishing the last of the shadows. Behind them, Ravencrest Manor stood silent and empty, its dark secrets finally laid to rest. The house would eventually be demolished, its cursed history fading into local legend. For Sarah, Zach, and Mike, The memory of that harrowing night would remain forever etched in their mind. And, as exhaustion finally overtook them, the three friends fell into a fitful sleep, each drawing comfort from the presence of the others. Their dreams were haunted by echoes of spectral music and the memory of reaching, grasping hands. But when they woke with a start, they found themselves safe in the motel room, the morning sun peeking through the curtains. In the days and weeks that followed, they struggled to readjust to their everyday life. Classes and part-time jobs seemed trivial in comparison to what they had faced. They found themselves jumping at shadows, flinching at unexpected noises, and avoiding dark, enclosed spaces. But slowly, gradually, they began to heal. They spoke often, supporting each other through nightmares and panic attacks. They researched the history of Ravencrest Manor, finding a sense of closure in understanding the full scope of what they had overcome. And as time passed, they discovered that their experience had changed them in unexpected ways. Sarah found herself drawn to studying psychology, fascinated by the human mind's capacity to face unimaginable horrors. Zach, always the adventurous one, channeled his newfound appreciation for life into extreme sports and travel. Mike delved deeper into his aunt's world, assisting her with research and occasionally accompanying her on less dangerous investigations. They never forgot Liam and Emily, keeping their memory alive through stories and small ritual. On the anniversary of that fateful night, they would meet to share a meal, light candles, and remember not just the friends they lost, the countless souls they had helped free. Years later, as they gathered once more to commemorate the event that had shaped their lives, Sarah raised a glass in toast. "To Ravencrest Manor," she said, her voice strong and clear. "To the darkness we faced, the light we found, and the strength we never knew we had." Zach and Mike echoed her toast, their eyes reflecting the bond forged in that haunted house so long ago. As they talked late into the night, sharing memories both painful and profound, they realized that Ravencrest Manor would always be a part of them. It was a scar they carried, yes, but also a reminder of their resilience, their courage, and the power of friendship in the face of unimaginable terror. And somewhere, in the great beyond, the freed souls of Ravencrest Manor smiled upon them, finally at peace.